Welcome back, everybody, and I'm really happy to be chatting now with my good old friend Reed Fleming, who I've known for, I have no idea how long, more than 40 years anyway. And Reed, welcome to our lay evangelist training process again. Good to have you with us.
Thank you.
So, Reed, would you like to just maybe say a couple of things about yourself so that people get a sense of who they're listening to?
Sure. Uh, as Tim says, we've known each other for over 40 years and had our beginnings with the Church Army back in the day, a society of evangelists, and that's kind of morphed into Threshold Ministries today. And I I have a ministry here in St. John, New Brunswick, working with people on the street level, and the people that I work with generally are folks who struggle with addictions or mental health issues, and or both. They pair up pretty nicely, and still and so that's the milieu in which I do my evangelism these days. But I've been at this evangelism stuff for that whole length of time that I've known Tim.
Hmm.
So that's that's me, and we're just starting a new project here in St. John where we're taking people who've re- really discovered hope in the gospel uh, through their time in struggling with addictions, and we're creating a Christian community for them to live in for a year, during which time we continue their discipleship with the idea of taking people who found hope to equip them to become people who give hope to others. And so we're just in the kind of building stages of that right now, but hopefully we'll be up and running this fall and have our first kind of cohort that runs through that year that we call the year of the Lord's favor, from Luke chapter 4, verse 19. So that's who I am and what I'm up to these days.
I love that idea of people discovering more hope as they share hope with others. As you go out in mission, then you grow, deeper in your own sense of faith and hope as well.
Yeah, isn't that the experience that we've had,
Hmm.
over the years?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it's you can't outgive God. We often say, and people in the health and prosperity gospel use that, I think, wrongly. But
Hmm.
but as we give ourselves in service, I mean, we're never depleted
Hmm.
in the process. God pours out more, and we grow more through
Hmm.
that.
Yeah. So the particular subject that I'm talking with you about today, Reed, is a inquirer's course called "Finding Your Way Back to God," which you introduced me to a few years ago, and which I've really appreciated finding out about. So, could you, just assuming that our hearers know nothing about it, could you maybe just describe for them what that course is and how it works?
Sure. It's a video series and a book that go together, and there's a manual for it, and it's designed to go 5 weeks. So it isn't a lengthy program, and it runs on kind of two tracks. One is taking what they call Pascal's wager seriously, and he encourages us to pray the prayer, God, if you're real, make yourself known to me. And the bet that we're making in that is that if people sincerely do that over this 5 week period, that they'll be delightfully surprised at what God does as they sincerely pray, God, if you're real, make yourself known to me. So that's one track, and it runs through the whole 5 weeks. The other track is the story of we often call it the prodigal son in church world, but they would call it the story of the loving father. That they say the whole premise is that this is the gospel in a kernel. This is the very nut of it, and so each week we look at an aspect of that story and look at it's called awakenings. So that the idea that that God awakens in us as we pray, God, make yourself known to us. And there are 5 awakenings that are identified in this story of the lost son, the story of the loving father, the story of the prodigal. So the first one is an awakening to longing. And what it does is it identifies that this boy has a sense of there's got to be more to life than this. Mm. And uh, in that study, we learn that we all have that kind of longing to find fulfillment, longing for something more than we've experienced, and that is a God-given thing. Now it takes this boy in our story down some pretty dark places, but the longing itself is from God, and that we all share it. So this is one of the reasons I like this as a presentation, because it puts its finger on something that's universal. So I work, as I said, with people with addictions or mental health issues, but they have this awareness. There's got to be more to life than this. Mm. And I'm sure that people in the suburbs or people that are healthier or better off in worldly kinds of ways have these same longings, that it's a universal thing that we can all touch on. So we see that in the first lesson, and it's this idea of awakening to a longing. And then we move on, and there's an awakening to regret. Now, all this time we're continuing to pray, God, if you're real, make yourself known to me. So we see him in our longing, and then as well in the regret that we've made choices and we've made assumptions and we've lived a certain life that's kept us in a lot of ways from the success that we long for. We're really become our own worst enemies in a way. And so we see the boy as he's sitting in the pigsty, and his life is filled with regret. So these first 2 weeks are kind of there isn't a real clear presentation of the gospel other than the hope that's out there. God, make yourself real to me in all of this. And then there's an awakening to need that they identify. I have this, well, Augustine would call it, or we identify from Augustine, a God-shaped hole, an infinite emptiness, that nothing that we pour in, or no education that we get, nothing we pour into our mouths, nothing we pour into our heads, nothing we put into our veins meets this basic need that we have. We're restless until we find our rest in God. And then we move on to an awakening to love, and the possibility that God could actually love me, and that I could respond in love to God and to my fellow human beings. And so we see each kind of builds on the other, and each follows the story of this son and the father in it. And then the final week is an awakening to life. And of course, Jesus says famously in John 10:10, I've come that they might have life in all its fullness. And so it's this awakening to the idea that I can have a satisfying, fulfilling life as I walk with God. So we have these 5 lessons, and it's all set around a meal. On the video, they're having a meal, and we did it also having a meal. So we would have this communal gathering, show these videos, 20-minute videos, and we would chat. And what our chats did is mirrored the very talks that we heard on the video that we saw. And one of the things I really appreciate about this is it's created in Chicago. So it's a North American
mm,
uh, series, and it kind of talks to North American sensibilities, and the accents
mm,
are uh, American Midwest, which mirror, the great swath of Canadian accents
mhm,
would fall into that same kind of. So it sounds like us
mm,
as we hear it,
mm,
and the people are quite varied, and so we have people who struggle with mental health issues that are on the video,
mm,
and we really like that. And we have people who have more intellectual lives, and we discover their journey and their progress in this. But it all follows this one story, and it all follows this one prayer: God, if you're real.
mm,
And the experience that we had in doing this, and I've done it several different ways. I had at the men's shelter, I used to do a Bible study, and we did a daily Bible study where we actually read through the the book,
mm,
and so those guys were being prepared to invite other people, as we did that study with 4 or 5 guys who faithfully walked through this book with me.
mm,
Now I had to do some interpreting of what was meant, because not everybody can read very well, and not everybody has the same level of understanding. But these guys bought into these simple ideas because they identified so much with the prodigal character,
mm,
that it made it easy to bring them along on the journey. And so we did that study, and it had a real impact on those 4 guys,
mm,
who then became the inviters, and the guys who interacted with people throughout the week. So then we did it, put on a meal in a inner city church hall, and people came, and these 4 guys became kind of group uh, facilitators
mm,
in after their own fashion. You have to kind of picture it. It wouldn't be the way that you might do at St. Margaret's, but it was really interesting, and and because they got this idea of this prayer that we were inviting people to pray, they had the nut of it. And because they identified with the prodigal and his journey, they could really help people walk through this.
mm,
So we did it once like that. And then some other people in town heard about it, some other churches that work in the inner city, and they invited us to do it at their programs. And so we've done it 4 or 5 times now.
mm,
And each time we find that there are people who find that prayer becomes answered in their lives.
mm, mm.
Now, there's others, they go through the motions, and especially when you do meal kinds of things in the inner city, you get people who come for the meal.
Yeah.
And so, that's great. And we want to bless people with that as well. But we really did see transformation in over those 4 or 5 times that we did it, in well over a dozen people who really were transformed. Now, this isn't the be all and the end all. This isn't the ABCs of the faith. This is just gets people started
Mm,
on the journey. It's really a conversion
mm,
uh, kind of story, and that's what it leads to, is
mm,
people making a decision. I want to have a life.
mm,
I want to discover this life. I want to walk this. And their journey, it's a beginning. And that's what I really like about this, is that it gets people on a really firm uh, journey towards God, having experienced Him through that prayer and having experienced Him through that study.
yeah, and John and I were talking a little while ago, John Bowen, about how sometimes with inquirers courses we have a tendency to overload them with information, with people.
Yes.
Maybe because we don't trust that the church is a good teaching institution for people to continue in their faith. I don't know, but I love the way that finding your way back to God gives people just enough information.
Yeah, just enough to
Yeah,
make a
yeah,
decision.
yeah,
And then people can find their own place or their own way, their
yeah,
own church group or
yeah.
whatever. And we do discipleship things as well. But uh, yeah, it's just enough information. And certainly for people who have intellectual challenges,
Mm,
it's it's easier to deal with that than a whole course that takes you from conversion through baptism in the Holy Spirit, ministry, and
mm,
on and on. That's just a bit much to take
mm,
all at one gulp.
mm. And I also love the way that it's so clever the way it doesn't get away from concepts, but it grounds those concepts in the narrative of the story of the loving father and the prodigal son, right? And because it's narrative based like that, it's easy for people to kind of sort of intuitively understand what those concepts are all about because they can see them in the story, right?
Yes, they can see them in the story and they can see them in their lives,
Yeah, yeah,
because I think that's why this story resonates with so many people is that uh, we can all relate to lostness.
yeah.
We can all relate to regret.
Mm,
We can all relate to longing.
mm,
There's got to be more. Even those of us who long ago came to faith, there's a continuous kind of
yeah.
longing
Yeah, yeah. So
that
that's a very sort of inclusive approach, isn't it? It's not like I found it and now I'm sharing it with you. It's more of, well, we're on this journey together, even those of us who've been on it for a long time.
yeah, well, nobody's a graduate from
Hmm.
this course,
Hmm. Hmm.
and and so we are, we all walk in the same shoes.
Yeah. So we've used the word course. Is that how you would have described it when you were advertising it, Reed, or would you have used a different kind of language to describe it?
Well, we called it because of the prayer challenge, we called it a 30-day challenge
Right.
and
Okay.
encourage people to pray this prayer for 30 days. And we had little cards with the prayer printed out that
Mm,
people, could take home.
mm,
And and we really did want people to pray that simple prayer. And we changed it every week. We had a little addition that caught on to the theme for that week, and
mm,
we would give out a business size card with that prayer
mm,
printed on it. So we called it a 30-day challenge. It's roughly 30 days after, like, so people would come to the first one and then the clock starts ticking. And we say, if you seriously pray this prayer for 30 days, watch and see what
mm,
it's kind of that taste and see idea,
mm-hmm,
daring God to show up.
mm-hmm.
And so that's how we kind of sold it in the first place.
Now you and your community have you folks have been active in that area for a long time, and so you have sort of a ready-made magnetic field, right? In the sense that you're not strangers in that area, and I'm guessing that when you first ran it, a lot of people that came to it were familiar to you already. Am I right about that, or would I be
Yeah, especially when we did it with these four guys
right?
first
Mm-hmm.
that became the core inviters and who could invite people with uh, having been informed themselves on
Mm-hmm.
having experienced it. So I think that that's the way that it grows for us.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I mean, it's great if somebody that you don't know kind of comes in the door and joins your meal and watches the video and engages in the discussions. But that isn't what happens typically.
Mm-hmm.
It starts with people that and then see how God grows it.
This has
And
been
if they're
actually
excited about it, it'll grow.
This has been a common theme actually in all the interviews I've done so far, is that people who run any kind of an inquirer's course, it seems that those who want to be a part of the leadership need to experience it for themselves first. And not only does it inform them, but it also motivates them to want to invite others to have the same kind of experience that they've had themselves.
Yeah, and we were quite intentional that that's what we wanted to do because, especially people that we deal with, and in terms of mental health and addictions, they're quite suspicious of people from the outside.
Mm-hmm.
Who come in with the quick and easy answers, and they're much more amenable to hearing it from a fellow struggler.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
what's Spurgeon talked about one beggar telling another beggar.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the principle that we wanted to
Yeah.
walk through.
Or to use an earlier illustration, the math student who's only 5 minutes ahead of you can sometimes be more helpful to you than the math teacher who's years ahead of you.
Yes.
Because the math teacher has forgotten what it was like to have those questions and to struggle to understand, whereas the person who's only 5 minutes ahead has. I'm thinking about some of the settings that our evangelists will be working in, and obviously they vary a lot. Some of them are like some of them are in a cathedral that is actually located in the inner city, surrounded by the inner city, and another one of them is in a sort of a church which is just off the University of Alberta. And we may, if the word gets out, of course, it will probably spread to other places too. Would you have any advice to give, Reed, to people who were contemplating using this material?
Well, I really think that it's good to start with a small
Mm.
group, and that's a good laboratory for learning how to use it in any kind of environment, like so that we can settle what it looks like here.
Mm.
And I forgot to say that this is founded on the videos by Dave and John Ferguson. I should give them full credit.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I would start it. I found it most helpful to start it with a small group. 4 people was a really good group for us, and we did it in more than the 5 weeks because we read through the book, which at the speed that people read we probably did it over 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
But then we did it in 5 weeks after that. So these guys were up and running. So it took some patient kind of nurture to get that first core ready. Now, I don't know that it would take that long in other settings, but it did for us. And since we're in it for relationships chiefly, that wasn't we weren't impatient with that because we were achieving what we wanted that whole 3 months anyway. That's what we were in it for.
So flexibility is a really important principle here, right? To adapt it to the situation that you find yourself in, rather than trying to fulfill somebody else's agenda, being able to be sensitive to the needs of your own community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Though I do think showing the videos over a 5-week period is good because it keeps that prayer. I don't know how long you could sustain that challenge. Right. Pray this prayer. If you do it for 30 days, that's I think that people who honestly and with open minds pray that prayer, that God will show up. And that's the cool thing about this, is that it doesn't depend on me then transferring any knowledge or giving people an experience. It's encouraging people to get with God and see what he wants to do.
I think this is a hurdle which a lot of Anglican people have a difficult time getting over. The people get so caught up in the idea that there's a certain amount of information that they need to transfer from one brain to another, rather than saying, okay, the purpose of this whole exercise is to help people connect with God. in an
Yes.
experiential kind of way. And I'm really liking what I'm hearing here. Now, am I remembering correctly that there's, as well as the prayer, that is there a sort of devotional material for each of the 30 days as well,
Well,
or?
there is a participant's guide
Mhm.
that has the a lot of the information and kind of homework that people can do. We didn't do a lot of that in our setting, but there is that, and people who are more academically inclined could do this, and there's nothing difficult about it. It's kind of set at a high school
Mhm.
English level,
Right.
and that's a good uh, resource. And as well, there's the repetition over and over again of this story. So each of these 5 weeks, you would hear the story in its entirety, and
Mm.
then you go back and zoom.
Mm.
Here we are zooming.
Mm.
Zoom in on that particular awakening for
Yeah.
that day.
Well, then that's a wonderful thing too, because by the time the 5 weeks is over, even people who aren't familiar with that story will probably find it seeping down into their
Well,
consciousness.
that's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And, we had people who were familiar with the story from, oh, that was the stained glass window in my church when I was a boy, kind of thing. Like people
Mm.
knew the story. And if they didn't know it biblically, they knew it from movies and like,
Mm. Mm.
you know, this is a common theme in
Mhm.
Hollywood, isn't it? This same sort of story of awakenings, and we
Yeah.
overlay that with the gospel. But people, by the end, they can tell their friends
Mm.
the story of this parable.
Mm.
They can become tellers of the parable, if nothing else, right? So if even if you didn't have a particular experience with God, you would know this story
Mm.
kind of inside and out. Uh, and who knows what God does with that
Well, that's
down the
fantastic,
road.
isn't it? Because I mean, honestly, if you can tell somebody else the parable of the loving father, you can share the gospel with somebody else because it's a
Well, that's
beautiful
right.
articulation of the gospel, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's the beauty of this is it takes that one chapter
Mm.
and and it becomes a bite-sized thing that we can kind of get into our brains, even if we're challenged
Mm.
intellectually.
Mm.
We can get that story
Mm.
and we can get it down so that we can tell it,
Mm.
and we can tell it in just a few minutes,
Mm.
and share the gospel. So I have friends now, and somebody, if you went up to one of them and said, tell me about this finding your way back to God, and they'd be able to tell you
Mm.
that story. I'm quite confident, and it's been a few years
Mm.
since we've done one.
Mm. We're bringing this to a close now. Reed, is there anything else that you'd like to share with us about it before we bring this to an end?
Well, it's just that it's the thing that I enjoy so much about this, as we've said, is that it doesn't try to do too much,
Mm.
but it just does just enough. It scratches where I was itching,
Mm.
and we found this better than any. Like I've used a lot of different courses
Mm.
and strategies over the years, and I find this one really a useful tool for the toolkit.
Mm.
And you can build in all these other programs because people have a lot yet to learn. So, after this, perhaps it'd be ideal to see somebody do an alpha, for instance, or
Mhm.
some other inquirers kind of course. But they would be ready to hear and apply that. So
Mm.
I really like it for that reason.
Mm.
And it's North American, so I
Mm.
like that too.
Yeah. Well,
Not
thank
that
you.
there's anything wrong with English accents, but
But I mean, honestly, I mean, to be obviously, I'm not here to diss Alpha, but I mean, you have to spend a lot of time explaining Nicky Gumbel's English jokes, and things like that. So I get you. I mean, it really is something that grows naturally out of our sort of cultural milieu.
mm,
Is so often, Bishop Stephen Cottrell says that the most effective inquirers program, hands down, is always the one that's homegrown because
mm,
it grows naturally out of the local community and uses the sort of the language and the ideas and the cultural assumptions of the local community. So
mm.
that's really fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing this time with us, Reed. Much
Well, thanks
appreciated.
for inviting me again.
Yeah. And I mean, you're a willing guy, so our lay evangelist may well call on you again for some more input as the time goes on.
Well, that'd be great.